hip-hop and cannabis have been intertwined for a long period of time. From mellow, melodious verses celebrating being high, to aggressive rap verses about the mass distribution of cannabis, the connection is undeniable. But something has changed in the last few years. Suddenly, hip-hop artists are prominently displaying these vibrantly hued bags in front of the camera. Emblazoned in vivid letters are names like Gelato, Purple Punch, and Skittles. The so-called Cali-Weed is more popular than ever, and has become a real hype in recent years. But is it always Cali-Weed where it says Cali-Weed? Moreover, what is the reason for the worldwide recognition that Californian cannabis is getting today? And how do hippies, the AIDS crisis, and Snoop Dogg factor into this narrative? To understand this, we have to travel back in time, more precisely, to the end of the 60s. During this period, the US Army was actively engaged in the Vietnam War, which sparked protests across the United States. San Francisco, among other places, became a focal point for these protests. Within the city, a multitude of hippies, representing the predominant youth culture of the era, were present. Notably, San Francisco boasted a substantial LGBTQ community, so significant that Time magazine dubbed the city the gay capital of the world. Keep this in mind, as its significance will become evident. This is where Dennis Peron emerges onto the scene. Born in the Bronx in 1945, Peron enlisted in the military as a means to swiftly distance himself from his family, who, like the prevailing sentiments of the time, harbored a general aversion to queer individuals. Hence, he chose to contribute to the Vietnam War effort as a member of the Air Force. Following the war's conclusion, he returned to San Francisco, carrying roughly a kilo of Vietnamese marijuana in his belongings. Leveraging his position as a U.S. Air Force soldier, he ingeniously managed to surreptitiously transport the contraband into the U.S. during his return flight. Once back in the country, he resolved to align himself with the hippie movement and embark on a radical transformation of his way of life. Peron resettled within a communal living arrangement alongside fellow hippies and proceeded to partake in the consumption of the smuggled marijuana while simultaneously engaging in its sale. Meanwhile, certain factions of the hippie movement had initiated their own cannabis cultivation in what would later be known as the Emerald Triangle, an area situated in the northwestern region of California. Characterized by rolling hills, abundant sunlight, and fertile soil, this enclave provided optimal conditions for cannabis growth. Moreover, it was strategically distant from law enforcement, thereby evading potential scrutiny. Nonetheless, during this time, both the cultivation and commercial distribution of cannabis remained prohibited. Simultaneously, the 1980s marked the inaugural era of hip-hop's commercial triumph. While cannabis consumption was indeed prevalent, it had yet to become a prominent subject within rap lyrics. This phenomenon can be attributed to various factors. Foremost among these was the association of cannabis with the hippie subculture. The hip-hop movement, eager to delineate itself from this group, actively sought to distance its image from the stoner stereotype. After all, cultivating a gangster persona would prove challenging if one were erroneously pigeonholed as a cannabis-consuming hippie. In addition, the 80s were the time of cocaine and crack. The black neighborhoods in New York in particular were hit hard by the crack epidemic, so it will be a few years before hip-hop is associated with weed. More on that later. In addition to the crack epidemic, the AIDS crisis was also raging. At the time, this mainly affected the queer communities, and also Dennis Peron. Smoking pot had already served him well in his fight against alcoholism. When his boyfriend at the time, Jonathan West, fell ill with AIDS and suffered from severe pain and nausea, Peron advised him to consume weed regularly, and indeed, the drug eased West's discomforts. In January 1990, Peron was charged with 100 grams of his boyfriend's personal use weed. Jonathan West died only 2 weeks after Peron's acquittal. From then on, everything changed for him.
This is not a war on drugs. This is a war on my kids that need medical marijuana.
He founded the San Francisco Cannabis Buyers Club in 1994, the first public cannabis store in the U.S. Here, cannabis was sold for medical purposes to seriously ill people. In 2 years, Peron thus managed to attract nearly 9,000 customers. In 1996, he and a few Sense brothers proposed a law that would legalize marijuana for medical purposes. Although 3 former U.S. presidents said legalization would endanger Americans' health, the bill passed by a narrow margin in the November 1996 election. Fast forward 2 decades. By the time legalization was passed in 2016, including for recreational purposes, not only was California weed ready to take over the market completely, but so was the business behind it. The product changed quickly. By 1996, cannabis in the US had an average THC content of 4%. By 2014, it was 12%. The boutique strains that everyone is licking their fingers for today are as high as 20-35% THC. This makes you really high, but can also have negative consequences. Studies suggest that increased THC content and consumption can lead to more cannabis-induced psychosis. Have you ever had experience with such a psychosis? Write it in the comments. But now back to rap. The first rapper with his own weed business was Burner. Even though he was rather semi-successful as a musician, His brand Cookies is one of the biggest players in the cannabis game. Berner knew the right people, namely the so-called Cookies family, a grower collective from California. In addition to Berner, this includes his right-hand man, Jai Chang aka Jigga, the cannabis genius who was taught his knowledge by his mother. Jigga has managed to breed some unique strains, such as Girl Scout cookies, and has thus helped Berner's Cookies to its current success. The Cookies family has pretty much coined everything related to Cali packs, and it, like many stoners, has a penchant for sweets. That's probably why Cookies creations have names like Sunset Sherbet, Cherry Pie, and Gelato. Even before legalization, these strains were known everywhere. That's probably where the iconic Kelly pack design came from. After Berner got into Cookies, the marketing game went through the roof. Suddenly, Cookies merchandise existed, and the name became a trademark. And after Berner became a plug for Wiz Khalifa, the rapper mentioned Cookies in his lyrics, which proves again that hip-hop has been one of the best marketing tools in the weed business since the 90s. The fact that weed has such a gigantic hype today is probably thanks to Cypress Hill, and Dr. Dre Cypress Hill taught fans what it means to be blunted, and The Chronic, by Dr. Dre, sent weed rap soaring up the charts. The way was now paved for an international success train of cannabis, and especially Cali-Weed. Hollywood also promoted cannabis culture with films like Friday, Half-Baked, and How High. Dr. Dre's legendary album, The Chronic, also launched the career of perhaps the greatest weed rapper of all time, Snoop Dogg. Legend has it that none other than Tupac got Snoop Dogg into blunt smoking. It's therefore unsurprising that Snoop Dogg was the second American rapper ever to have his own signature weed strain. When Snoop Dogg rapped about OG Kush, it ignited a widespread desire to experience it firsthand. In an era where cannabis companies continue to grapple with advertising restrictions on social media and television, the reliability of rappers endures. Their endorsements carry considerable weight. What they smoke, their followers, many numbering in the millions, aspire to partake in as well. The Cali-Weed business developed into a billion-dollar market, but where there is light, there is also shadow. Some people just want to make money at any price. Consequently, there are more and more cases of fake Cali-Weed, cannabis on which the origin says California, but which actually comes from some laboratory in the Midwest. These knockoffs are flooding the states and are also raising safety issues. Like all products sold outside licensed dispensaries, fake Cali-Weed is not tested for pesticides and other contaminants, leaving health experts concerned. The cannabis could pose health risks. Licensed cannabis cultivators and businesses can't distribute their wares to unlicensed dispensaries and delivery services without risking punishment from regulatory agencies, meaning that any Cali-Weed item that customers find in an illegal cannabis shop is almost certainly counterfeit. For those of you intrigued by the notion of trying Cali-Weed, it is prudent to familiarize yourself with methods to discern genuine cannabis packaging and labels from the spate of fakes. This knowledge equips you with the ability to avert the potential health risks that these knockoff products might cause. What are your experiences with weed from California? Write it in the comments. Feel free to subscribe to my channel if you liked this video and activate the bell to not miss any new uploads.